weekend, I started to plant my garden, and I was looking at all of these beautiful fresh basil starts, and I was reminded about back when I was a sommelier in a restaurant, how every spring I had to completely change the wine list. And that's because as soon as the menu changes and you're bringing on spring vegetables, like all of a sudden all the wines that you had to go with wintry food don't really make sense anymore. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit today about some really great wines that you can enjoy in the spring. In particular, when you're talking about spring vegetable, there's a lot of bitterness that comes through, a lot of very green flavors, lots of chlorophyll. So you want to think about wines that are going to highlight those flavors, and also think about the way that those flavors could affect wine. A great example of that, actually, I'll jump right on in with artichoke. Artichokes are really funny because they have a lot of bitterness to them, and there's also a chemical compound in artichoke that's called chinar, and chefs love it because every time you eat an artichoke, everything else that you taste afterwards tastes sweeter, much more complex, more savory. It's wonderful to have with other foods. However, with wine, artichokes are wine's enemy. Artichokes will make most red wines taste really metallic. Actually, really all red wine. White wines also can taste a little metallic with artichoke, not as bad. In fact, when it comes to things like artichoke, I really like to have wines that have a little bit of bitterness in them as well, and some really intense green flavors. Probably the best wine that I have here overall to go with a lot of spring produce is our wine of the month, this Chilean Sauvignon Blanc. If you've tasted it yet, you might have noticed that it has this incredible fresh grassy aroma, super vibrant, really intense, really green, also really citrusy. That'll work with artichoke, maybe. You might have to try it. Other spring vegetables that can be tricky are things like asparagus. In Germany, they call asparagus Spargel, and when you're there in the springtime, it's amazing. The Spargel season, you see asparagus everywhere on every menu. Of course, in Germany, as opposed to having green asparagus, it's all white asparagus. You'll find it grilled and served with ham and hollandaise, or made into soups. It's really heavenly stuff. And one of the things that I really love asparagus with, in that nod to a very classic regional pairing, is Riesling. And what I have here is a dry German Riesling. Yes, Riesling can be dry, and it is absolutely delicious. This is actually from one of my favorite producers, Dr. Lawson, in the Mosel region of Germany, and that dry Riesling has an incredible zippy, intense acidity that works really well with a lot of the spring veg. Other spring vegetables I love, this is actually one of my favorite things in the spring, are fava beans. When they're fresh, they are so amazing. Like, you break these open, and then there's so much work because then you've got to take the skin off of this little bean as well. But they are so delicious, and they have a real sweetness to them, and you just lightly cook them in some butter, and they work really great with wine. So things like fava beans, I actually really like that with something like an unoaked Chardonnay, something with some nice fruit to it. No oak, because oak is going to really clash badly with these green fresh flavors. It'll really emphasize the oak, and you'll lose a lot of the fruit. And in this case, we really want to emphasize the fruit flavors here. The other kinds of produce to talk about that are really great in the spring are things like onions. Actually, right here I've got some spring onions, some spring garlic. Spring garlic's amazing. It's so savory, lots of really great complex flavors that come out of that. I like to do a lot with these spring onions. If you take them and just saute them, they're really great in a really simple preparation with things like grilled chicken. You can make a soup out of them. They're also really good. And they have a real spiciness to them that's not spicy in heat. You just get this nice tang, really aromatic. I like that with a range of wines. You can do that with something like our Cooper's Hawk White, which is a little bit more aromatic. That's a beautiful combination. You get this Pinot Gris and Riesling it's not sweet, but there's again a light fruitiness to it that really highlights well with the savory and spicy elements that you get from the garlic and the onions. Other things that I like, green peas, these things, they have a real sweetness to them. They are difficult for me to cook with because I mostly just eat them all straight out of the bowl. They're awesome, and also really green flavors. Again, the sweetness, the green flavor works great with our Cooper's Hawk White, goes great with Riesling. Other things that I really like with spring vegetables are rosé. This is a rosé actually from the Rhone Valley of France. It's a style that's very dry, a little bit paler in color than our Cooper's Hawk Rosé, but it's what I've got on hand, and I know that's going to be delicious with some spring produce. Other things that I have here, these are dandelion greens, and this is one thing that you see a lot of in the springtime are super bitter vegetables, and that bitterness can be really pleasant. Think about things like arugula and radicchio, where you get those bitter flavors, and they work really well against fattier foods where you get this nice contrast, or sweeter things. And there are some wines out there that have a real bitterness to them. A great example is Grüner Veltliner. This is an Austrian wine. Grüner means green in German, and the wine really tastes green, and it has a very, I wouldn't call it a bitter wine, but it certainly is a green wine. It tastes a little bit like arugula and some of those really grassy, intense, almost bitter herbal flavors. It's a delicious wine, and it's one of my go-tos for the springtime, along with Sauvignon Blanc, which in itself is extremely green. Other green things I have here, I've got some Braquela Rob, another really bitter green, which works great with Gruner, works great with Sauvignon Blanc, grilled with a little bit of olive oil, really enhance those really bright green flavors, and it's delicious. Also some cilantro. Think about cilantro and all of the other really wonderful, very fresh herbs that are going to be coming out of your garden and mine coming up. They're great on everything, and another great way to go with these fresh herbs are things like Blanc De Blanc or other sparkling wines that have a lot of acidity, that are bright and fresh and vibrant and fruity. You kind of get the idea. It's sort of all about white wine when it comes to highlighting the flavors of these really fresh green spring greens. So happy spring to all of you. Happy drinking. Enjoy your pairings, and I look forward to drinking with you in person soon. Cheers.